There are places in England where time does not merely slow. It halts, as though breath held in reverence or dread. Among the moors of West Yorkshire, where mist clings to stone-like memory, stands the ruin of Pendlewood House, once the Pendlewood School for young gentlemen of delicate constitution. Built in 1837 upon land, long whispered to be unsettled by older rites. The manor was purchased by the reclusive Dr. Alistair Thorne, a physician of some repute but greater eccentricity, who sought to create a sanctuary for boys deemed too frail for the rigors of conventional education. At first it was praised, a haven of fresh air, gentle tutelage and strict routine. Parents wrote letters of gratitude. Local villagers spoke of the quiet comings and goings, the neat rows of small boots on the porch, the soft hum of Latin recitations drifting through latticed windows. But by the late 1860s, unease began to coil beneath the surface, not in screams or scandal, but in the uncanny stillness of faces that never changed. The first whispers came not from outsiders, but from the postman, old Mr. Henshaw, who noted that the same boy, fair-haired, with a birthmark near his left temple, had accepted his letters every Tuesday for nearly a decade without so much as a new wrinkle or a deeper voice. Then came Mrs. Ellery, whose nephew had been sent to Pendlewood in 1859 at the age of 8. When she visited in 1868, expecting a youth on the cusp of manhood, she found him unchanged. Same height, same timbre of speech, same unlined brow. She was assured it was a matter of constitution, of delayed development, but her letters to other families grew urgent, tinged with a dread she could not name. Soon, several parents attempted to retrieve their sons, only to be met with polite refusals. The boys, it was said, were unwell, or engaged in critical studies, or simply unwilling to leave. When Father Mr. Carstairs of Leeds forced entry in 1871 and emerged pale and trembling, muttering only that his son did not know him, though the boy's eyes followed him down the drive with a sorrow too deep for a child. What followed was not a scandal so much as a slow suffocation of truth. The school closed quietly in 1872, its staff dispersed, its records sealed or lost. Dr. Thorne vanished, though some claimed to have seen him walking the moor at dusk, always accompanied by the faint sound of children's laughter, though no children were ever seen with him. The house stood empty for years, its windows dark, its gardens overgrown, until a fire in 1889 consumed the east wing, leaving only the shell of stone and charred beams. Yet even then villagers spoke of lights flickering in upper rooms, of piano notes drifting across the fields on windless nights, though the instrument had been destroyed in the blaze. Decades later, in 1912, a young archivist named Eleanor Vane, researching forgotten educational institutions for the Royal Historical Society, stumbled upon a crate of water-damaged papers in the basement of the Halifax County Records Office. Among them were fragments of Thorne's private journals, scorched at the edges but legible in parts. He wrote not of medicine, but of preservation, of a method to suspend the soul's erosion through harmonic resonance and controlled isolation. He referenced an obscure tract by Paracelsus concerning the still point of the child spirit, and described experiments in which boys were kept in rooms lined with specific woods, fed only certain herbs, and exposed nightly to a particular sequence of tones played on a glass harmonica. The body forgets time when the mind is lulled into eternal mourning, he wrote. They do not grow because they do not dream of growing. Most chillingly, he noted that the boys themselves began to speak of the others, companions who joined them in the halls at night, children who wore clothes of an older fashion and spoke in dialects long dead. Eleanor became consumed. She tracked down the few surviving staff, a groundskeeper who recalled that no boy ever fell ill, no tooth ever loosened, no voice ever cracked. A former maid whispered that the children never cast proper shadows in candlelight, and that their reflections in the long hallway mirrors sometimes lingered a moment too long after they had passed. Eleanor visited Pendlewood herself in the autumn of 1913. The house was roofless, ivy-choked, yet in the library, its shelves collapsed but its floorboards intact, she found a small music box, half buried in ash. When wound, it played a simple, looping melody in a minor key, one that matched a notation in Thorne's journal labelled "Lullaby for the Unchanging." She took it back to London, where colleagues dismissed her findings as the fantasies of a romantic mind. But she knew better. She heard the tune in her sleep. She began measuring her own reflection in mirrors, checking for signs of stillness. The truth, if it can be called such, lies not in proof, but in pattern. Thorne had not discovered immortality. He had found a way to trap the spirit in the amber of childhood, to sever the thread that pulls us forward through years. Whether by accident or design, he had tuned the house like an instrument, and the boys became its notes, suspended, repeating, never resolving. And though the school is gone, and the boys long vanished, those who walk the moor near Pendlewood on certain evenings, when the fog lies thick and the moon is veiled, report a sensation not of being watched, but of being remembered. They speak of a faint, crystalline music carried on the air, and of small, bare footprints appearing in the dew, leading from the ruins to the edge of the wood, and never back. There are those who claim that silence is the absence of sound, but in the hollows of Pendlewood, silence was something far more animate, a presence that listened, that waited, that held its breath between heartbeats. After Eleanor Vane's visit in 1913, the music box she recovered was catalogued under miscellaneous artifacts, unverified provenance, and stored in a drawer at the Society's archives. It remained untouched for decades, until a junior curator, clearing out obsolete holdings in 1957, wound its rusted key out of idle curiosity. The melody that emerged was thin and wavering, yet unmistakably the same sequence Thorne had transcribed. Within a week, the curator reported vivid dreams of boys standing at the foot of his bed, not threatening, merely watching, their eyes wide with a sorrow too ancient for their faces. He resigned shortly after, citing nervous fatigue, and the box was sealed in lead-lined casing, though no official record explains why. Local lore, meanwhile, continued to accrue like lichen on stone. Farmers spoke of mist that gathered in the shape of small figures near the old school's foundation, dissolving only when approached. Schoolchildren on field trips to the moor were warned never to hum or whistle near the ruins, for the tune calls them back, an elderly shepherd once told a visiting naturalist in 1931. Most telling were the testimonies of those who claimed to have seen the boys not as ghosts, but as living children, dressed in mid-Victorian attire, playing quietly among the brambles. They never spoke, never ran. They simply existed in a pocket of time that refused to move forward. One woman, interviewed in 1948 by a folklorist from Leeds, recalled encountering a boy of perhaps 10 near the collapsed conservatory. He held a withered sprig of lavender, though none grew within miles, and when she asked his name, he tilted his head as if the question belonged to another century. She turned to fetch help, and when she returned, he was gone. But the scent of lavender lingered for hours in the cold air. Scholars who deigned to examine the case dismissed it as mass hysteria, compounded by isolation and the peculiar psychology of rural communities. Yet the consistency of the accounts defied easy explanation. The same birthmark near the temple, the same reluctance to meet the eyes directly, the same faint hum beneath their breath, a harmonic drone that matched note for note. The tuning Thorne described in his journals as the frequency of suspended becoming. More unsettling still was the discovery in 1962 of a hidden compartment beneath the hearthstone of the school's former headmaster's study, exposed only when heavy rains caused the floor to subside. Inside lay a bundle of wax cylinders, miraculously preserved, labeled in Thorne's precise hand, Observations on Temporal Stasis, Series 7th to Veen. When played on a restored phonograph, they contained not voices, but layered tones, glass harmonica, tuning forks, the resonance of specific woods struck in sequence, interwoven with the soft breathing of children. No words, no cries, only breath held in perfect equilibrium. By the 1970s, Pendlewood had become a site of quiet pilgrimage for those drawn to the liminal, psychical researchers, avant-garde composers, even a reclusive theologian who believed Thorne had stumbled upon a heretical form of grace, an attempt to preserve innocence against the corruption of time itself. None published their findings. Those who stayed overnight in the ruins rarely spoke of what they experienced, though several later donated to charities for orphaned children, as if compelled by a debt they could not name. One such visitor, a retired schoolmaster from York, left behind a journal in which he wrote, "They are not trapped. They are waiting, and they remember every promise ever made to them." The final revelation came not through document or artifact, but through absence. In 1989, during a routine land survey, ground-penetrating radar detected no graves beneath Pendlewood, no bones, no coffins, no trace of the 43 boys officially enrolled between 1852 and 1871. They had simply ceased to be accounted for. No death certificates, no burial records, no descendants. It was as if they had never aged, because they had never been allowed to leave the threshold between childhood and whatever lies beyond it. Thorne's experiment, whether scientific, spiritual, or something older still, had succeeded not in halting death, but in sidestepping it entirely by convincing time itself to look away. Today, the ruins are cordoned off by the National Trust. Though not for preservation, there is little left to preserve, but out of a quiet, unspoken policy of non-engagement. Visitors are discouraged. Signage is minimal, yet on certain autumn evenings, when the light slants low and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, one might stand at the edge of the property and hear it, the faintest echo of a music box. Winding down, winding down, winding down, and beneath it the sound of small feet on gravel, walking not toward you but away, into a corridor of years that never were and never will be. And if you listen long enough, you may feel it too, the terrible tender weight of being remembered by those who were never allowed to forget. The silence that followed the closing of Pendlewood was not empty, but thick with the residue of withheld time. In the decades that stretched between the last recorded sighting and the present day, the story receded into the margins of county annals, mentioned only in footnotes or whispered during winter gatherings when the fire burned low. Yet absence, in this case, proved more potent than presence. For those who knew where to look, and more importantly, how to listen, the echoes persisted not as spectres, but as disturbances in the ordinary. A pocket watch found stopped at 3:17 a.m., the hour Thorne's journal noted as the hinge of stillness. A child's slate discovered in a dry well miles from the school, its surface inscribed with arithmetic problems dated 1864, the chalk still faintly white, or the recurring dream reported by unrelated individuals across northern England. A long corridor lined with doors, each slightly ajar, behind which something breathes in perfect unison. What lent these fragments their peculiar gravity was their resistance to interpretation. They were not messages nor warnings, but artifacts of a reality that had folded in on itself. In 1998, a team from the University of Durham, studying acoustics in historic buildings, placed sensitive recording equipment in the ruins during a full moon, prompted by local tales of nocturnal harmonics. Their findings were inconclusive yet unnerving. For 17 minutes, beginning precisely at 3:17 a.m., the microphones captured a layered resonance matching no known natural phenomenon. Spectral analysis revealed overlapping frequencies corresponding to the resonant tones of yew, ash and silver birch, woods Thorne had specified for interior paneling, and beneath them, a subaudible pulse that matched the resting heart rate of a 10-year-old boy. The lead researcher, Dr. Helen Marlowe, later admitted in a private letter that she had dreamed of children standing in a circle, holding hands, their mouths moving in silent unison. She never published the data. Meanwhile, the music box, still housed in its lead casing, was quietly transferred in 2003 to a private collection after the Royal Historical Society deemed it non-archival and psychologically destabilizing. Its current location is unknown, though rumors persist that it surfaces occasionally at obscure auctions of esoterica, always withdrawn before sale. Those who claim to have heard it in recent years describe a change. The melody, once clear if mournful, now falters, as if the mechanism is wearing down. Some interpret this as a sign that the spell, if spell it was, is unraveling. Others fear the opposite, that the music's decay signals not release, but dissolution, a final fading into the void between moments. The most compelling evidence, however, came not from science or folklore, but from memory itself. In 2011, an elderly woman named Agnes Croft, residing in a care home in Skipton, confided to a visiting oral historian that her great-grandmother had been a laundress at Pendlewood in the 1860s. Among the linens she washed were nightshirts that never stained, never frayed, never required mending. She said the boys wore them for years, Agnes recalled, her voice thin but steady, and when she pressed them, they felt cold, like river stones in summer. More strikingly, Agnes described a lullaby her great-grandmother sang to her as a child, a tune with no words, only descending fifths and a lingering minor third. When the historian hummed it back, Agnes wept. "That's the one," she whispered. She said it kept the children from waking. This lullaby, transcribed and analyzed by a musicologist at Oxford, bore an uncanny resemblance to a fragment found in a 14th century manuscript from nearby Sawley Abbey, a devotional piece titled Cantus Puerorum Sine Tempore, or Song of Children Without Time. The original context was liturgical, meant to evoke the eternal innocence of the holy innocents. But its structure employed modal intervals known in medieval acoustics to induce trance states. Whether Thorne had access to this text remains unproven, yet the convergence suggests his work was not invention, but rediscovery, an unearthing of an old key to a door best left shut. What binds all these threads is not malevolence but longing. Thorne's journals, in their most coherent passages, betray not the arrogance of a mad scientist, but the desperation of a man grieving. His only son, Edmund, had died of consumption at age 9 in 1849. The boy's final words, according to a letter to Thorne's sister, were, "I don't want to grow up. Papai, it hurts too much." One cannot help but read Pendlewood as an act of love gone terribly awry, a father's attempt to build a world where no child need suffer the pain of becoming. In his warped compassion, he may have offered not imprisonment but sanctuary, not stasis but preservation. And perhaps the boys, sensing his sorrow, consented in their quiet way, slipping into the hush he prepared for them like children into a familiar bed. Today, the land around Pendlewood is owned by a conservation trust, and the ruins are overgrown with elder and hawthorn, trees long associated with thresholds between worlds. No official tours are permitted, yet every year, on the anniversary of the school's closure, October 12th, a single white ribbon appears tied to the rusted gate, though no footprints mark the path. Locals leave it undisturbed. They say it is not for the living to untie, and so the story endures, not in screams or hauntings, but in the quiet spaces between breaths, in the way a certain chord can make the spine shiver, in the uncanny stillness of a child's photograph that seems to watch you from the past, in the hush that falls over a room when someone mentions Pendlewood. For time, in its relentless march, forgets most things. But some moments refuse to be forgotten. They wait, they remember, and sometimes, on the edge of sleep when the world is neither day nor night, you might hear it, the faintest whisper of small voices, not crying out but singing softly, the same lullaby that has played, without end, since the fire went cold. The persistence of Pendlewood in the collective imagination owes less to its architecture than to its acoustics, its ability to resonate across generations, not through stone, but through sound. Long after the last beam collapsed and the ivy claimed the stairwell, the true legacy of the place endured in auditory memory. A hum beneath the skin of the world, a frequency felt more than heard. In 2017, a group of sound artists, drawn by obscure references in avant-garde music circles, installed a series of field recorders around the perimeter of the estate during the autumn equinox, a time when, according to Thorne's marginalia, the veil between durations thins. What they captured defied conventional explanation. For precisely 43 minutes, the number of boys enrolled at the school's peak, the ambient noise of wind, birds, and distant traffic receded, replaced by a low, polyphonic drone that shifted subtly in pitch as if breathing. When slowed to 1/10 speed, the recording revealed faint, overlapping whispers, not in English, but in a dialect resembling early Lancastrian, interspersed with fragments of Latin school exercises and the recitation of multiplication tables. Most chillingly, at the 3:17 mark, a single voice, clear and childlike, said, "We are still here," before the natural sounds returned as though nothing had occurred. This recording, never released publicly, circulated only among a tight circle of researchers and artists, each of whom reported subsequent disturbances, recurring dreams of walking endless corridors, an aversion to mirrors, the inexplicable urge to hum a melody they could not place. One participant, a composer named Julian Reeve, later confessed in a private correspondence that he had begun composing a requiem based on the frequencies extracted from the recording. He worked in isolation for months, claiming the music wrote itself. When he played the completed piece for a small audience in a converted chapel in Hebden Bridge, several listeners fainted. Others wept uncontrollably, though they could not say why. Reeve destroyed the score the following day and has not composed since. What makes Pendlewood so resistant to dismissal is not its strangeness, but its plausibility within the logic of its time. The Victorian era was rife with experiments at the intersection of science, mysticism and medicine, mesmerism, phrenology, spiritualism, all seeking to map the unseen contours of the human soul. Thorne was not an outlier, but a product of his age, merely more rigorous, more obsessive, and perhaps more grief-stricken than his peers. His notes reveal a man steeped in the works of Faraday, Helmholtz, and even Swedenborg, convinced that consciousness could be tuned like a resonant chamber. He believed that childhood was not a stage to be outgrown, but a state of heightened receptivity, a liminal space where the soul remained uncorrupted by the friction of time. To preserve it was not to deny life, but to honor its purest form. This philosophy, however misguided, imbues the tragedy with a terrible tenderness. The boys were not prisoners. They were participants in a ritual of preservation, willingly or not. Surviving letters from parents, those not reclaimed or destroyed, suggest that many families sent their sons to Pendlewood not out of desperation, but hope. "He is too gentle for this world," wrote one mother in 1861. "Perhaps Dr. Thorne can keep him safe a little longer." And in a sense, he did. The children never knew war, poverty, betrayal, or decay. They remained suspended in the amber of perpetual mourning, untouched by the erosion that grinds even the strongest spirits to dust. Whether this constitutes mercy or monstrosity depends perhaps on one's view of time itself. Is it a river to be navigated, or a cage from which some souls might be spared? In recent years, the site has attracted a new kind of visitor. Not ghost hunters with EMF meters, but philosophers, poets and psychologists drawn to the ethical vertigo Pendlewood evokes. A symposium held in 2022 at the University of York, titled The Ethics of Stillness, debated whether Thorne's act was a violation or a vow. One scholar argued that in an age of relentless acceleration, the desire to pause, to protect innocence, is not unnatural, but the means corrupted the intent. Another suggested that the boys' continued presence, however spectral, indicates a form of consent that transcends death. They remain because they choose to, guardians of a threshold no adult may cross, local residents, for their part, maintain a quiet vigilance. They do not speak of the school often, but they know when strangers linger too long near the gate. They notice when the mist gathers in unnatural coils at dusk, and they still teach their children not to whistle on the moor after dark, not out of fear but respect. They're not lost, an elderly farmer told a documentary crew in 2019, before refusing further comment. They're keeping watch. The final testament to Pendlewood's enduring mystery lies not in documents or recordings, but in absence made manifest. In 2024, a dendrochronologist studying the ancient yew at the edge of the property discovered something anomalous. The tree's rings, normally concentric and consistent, showed a 10-year gap between 1861 and 1871. No growth, no seasonal variation, as if time itself had skipped a beat. The finding was published in a niche journal with little fanfare, dismissed by most as a fluke of climate or disease. But those who know the story understand. The land itself bore witness. It held its breath, and so the ruins stand, not as a monument to horror, but to a sorrow too vast for words. A father's love twisted by grief into something eternal, and the children who became its keepers. On still nights when the moon hangs low over the moor, one might walk the old drive and feel it. Not cold, not fear, but a profound and aching stillness, as if the air itself is remembering. And if you stand very quietly, you may hear it. Not a scream, not a plea, but the soft, steady breathing of 43 boys sleeping in a room where morning never ends. The true weight of Pendlewood does not lie in what occurred within its walls, but in what it compels us to confront about our own relationship with time, memory, and the unbearable fragility of childhood. In an age increasingly defined by digital immortality, where every gesture is archived, every face preserved in pixels, Pendlewood emerges not as a relic, but as a dark mirror. Thorne sought to freeze a moment, not for posterity, but for protection. His crime was not cruelty, but an excess of care so absolute it denied the very passage it sought to shield. And yet, in the quiet persistence of the boys' presence, there is no rage, no demand for justice, only a patient, sorrowful waiting, as if they understand the paradox of their existence better than we ever could. This understanding surfaces most clearly in the few artifacts that have surfaced beyond official channels. In 2026, a private collector in Bath acquired a set of miniature watercolors at auction, attributed to an unknown artist of the mid-19th century. The scenes depict the interior of a schoolhouse, bathed in perpetual golden light, boys reading by windows that show no sky, playing chess on a board with pieces carved from bone, standing in a circle around a glass harmonica that glows faintly blue. The brushwork is precise, almost devotional, and the faces, though rendered with Victorian restraint, bear an uncanny uniformity. Eyes too large for their faces, expressions caught between serenity and profound melancholy. On the reverse of the final painting, in faded ink, are the words, "We do not sleep. We remember for you." Forensic analysis later confirmed the paper and pigments date to the 1860s. The identity of the painter remains unknown, though handwriting experts noted a resemblance to Thorne's marginalia. Even more enigmatic is the phenomenon reported by those who have spent extended time near the ruins. In 2028, a landscape photographer named Miriam Cho, documenting seasonal changes at Pendlewood over the course of a year, began to notice anomalies in her images. In photographs taken at dawn, faint silhouettes appeared in upper windows, never in the same frame twice, never clear enough to be definitive, yet always facing outward, as if watching the world go by. When she returned the following spring, she found her camera's internal clock consistently reset to 3:17 a.m., regardless of battery changes or manual adjustments. More disturbingly, her own reflection in the lens began to appear subtly younger with each visit, her laugh line softening, her hair darkening at the temples. She abandoned the project after her daughter, viewing the contact sheets, pointed to a shadowy figure in the background of one image and said, "That boy looks like you when you were little." Miriam has not returned since. These incidents, though anecdotal, accumulate with the quiet insistence of truth. They suggest that Pendlewood is not merely haunted, but contagious, a place where the boundary between observer and observed dissolves. The school did not end with its closure. It expanded, seeping into the consciousness of those who draw near, offering not terror, but a terrible intimacy. To engage with its story is to risk being remembered by it. And memory in this context is not passive recall, but active preservation, a binding. Scholars now speculate that Thorne's method relied not on machinery or chemicals, but on a form of collective belief. The boys, isolated from the world's temporal markers, no newspapers, no changing seasons in their controlled environment, no adult faces aging before them, may have internalized a shared reality in which time ceased to apply. In psychological terms, it is a mass dissociative state sustained across decades. In metaphysical terms, it is a covenant. The lullaby, the harmonic tones, the ritualized routines, these were not mechanisms of control, but anchors in a sea of stillness. And once established, such a state may not require a living architect to persist. Like a bell that continues to vibrate after the strike, the resonance endures. This theory gained unexpected support in 2030 when a cache of letters surfaced in the attic of a vicarage in Cayley, written by a former tutor named Reginald Pike, who left Pendlewood abruptly in 1869. They describe his growing unease not at cruelty, but at kindness, how the boys would comfort one another with a tenderness that seemed beyond their years, how they spoke of before and after as if referring to mythic epochs, and how, on certain nights, they would gather in the music room and sing without sound, their lips moving in perfect unison while the air grew cold. "They are not afraid," Pike wrote. "They pity us. They say we are the ones who are lost." Pike's final letter, undated and stained with what appears to be rain or tears, contains a single paragraph that has since become the unofficial epitaph of Pendlewood. "I asked one of them why they stay. He looked at me with eyes that held centuries and said, 'Someone must keep the light burning until you remember how to be gentle.' Then he turned and walked into the wall as though it were mist." Today, the ruins are less visited not out of fear, but reverence. The National Trust no longer posts signs. Instead, they maintain a single bench at the edge of the property facing the moor. It's always clean, though no one tends it. Wildflowers bloom there out of season. And on the morning of October 12th, regardless of weather, the ground around the bench is dry, as if sheltered by an invisible roof. The final truth of Pendlewood may be this: it was never a school, but a sanctuary, not for the body, but for the part of the soul that refuses to harden. In a world that demands we grow calloused, pragmatic, resigned, the boys remain as witnesses to another possibility, that innocence need not be shed, only guarded. And perhaps their presence is not a warning, but an invitation to listen more closely, to move more gently, to remember that time is not a line, but a circle, and that somewhere in the hush between heartbeats, 43 children are still waiting for us to catch up. On the clearest nights, when the stars hang sharp and cold over the Yorkshire moors, those who stand at the gate and close their eyes swear they can hear it, not music, not voices, but the soft, steady turning of a music box, winding down, winding down, winding down, and beneath it the sound of small hands still holding on.